Hello and welcome to this rather unusual book launch. My name is Bruce Kaye and I am the author. I want to begin by thanking a few people. First of all, uh, uh, thank you, Stephen Pickard, for your kind words. I've known Stephen as a friend for a long time, and I regard him highly as a leader in the Anglican Church, both here and overseas. I want to thank Hilary Reagan and the staff at ATF who have brought this book to the public in extraordinarily efficient and effective time. I also would like to acknowledge the assistance we have been given in the publishing of this book from the Centre for Public and Contextual Theology at Charles Sturt University. The book is set in the middle of the 19th century, and its focus is church-state relations. It draws in a number of people who were in conflict in those changes that were taking place. Richard Burke, the governor, on the one hand, a liberal, democratically inclined governor, Anglican in background, but he wanted to change the monopoly of the Church of England over church finance from the government and education. And he also wanted to change the way in which the church exercised its authority within the state. Broughton was opposed to him on all those fronts, and it affected a number of things. First of all, it affected the way in which schools were run in the colony. Burke wanted them to be run not by a monopoly controlled by the Church of England, but by each of the churches and also the state. Ultimately, he wanted to have national churches, that is to say, churches run by the government. That didn't happen until much later, but he did wrest the monopoly from the Church of England in the face of stiff opposition from Broughton. He also wanted to change the way in which the churches received government funding. The Church of England had a monopoly on that because the Church of England was the official church of the English state at that time. And in the long history of the English Christendom, that had reinforced its position, both in terms of privilege and in terms of power. So these are questions which Burke and Broughton fought about. But there are other issues that came up in the middle of the 19th century, and they can be focused on the founding of the University of Sydney. The government wanted to establish a university. The proposers did not want it to be like Cambridge and Oxford, which was basically primarily as a place where ordinands, clergy for the Church of England, were trained. They wanted it to be a secular program of instruction. That is to say, divinity or ordination training would not be included. Only non-divinity subjects would be included in the curriculum. There would, of course, be no religious test, and the promoters of it initially did not want clergy or the bishops particularly to be involved in the running of the university. That changed somewhat, and the first provost of the university was in fact an Anglican clergyman, and there were clergy on the Senate in the first instance. So these areas of conflict emerged, and one about finance and who the Church of England was particularly interesting, namely the founding of the university. The question was that the government wanted to give money and land for the foundation of university colleges by the respective denominations. But the question was, who was the Church of England to whom the land might be given? Bishop Broughton was away in England. In his absence, his commissary was the Archdeacon, who wanted not to be involved and was opposed to any involvement, as Broughton was, with the university or the government in relation to the university. That was true also of Bishop Tyrrell in Newcastle, who was a kind of surrogate for Broughton. But the Chief Justice, Alfred Stephen, a prominent lay churchman, wanted to be involved and wanted to be organised so that some advantage could be taken of the grants that the government wanted to give. So he brought together a committee to establish an Anglican College. The government were then faced with the question, is this college, this committee, a legitimate representation of who the Church of England is. And that was an internal dispute with the Church of England, within the members of the Church of England, to which Stephen made a very significant contribution. Bishop Selwyn came from New Zealand and Tyrol. The bishops and the leading clergy, all the clergy in the diocese, were involved in how to resolve this question. And eventually, the committee, which was established by Stephen, was in fact the body extended somewhat to include a lot of other people, clergy mainly, the body to which the government decided they would grant the money and the land for the creation of an Anglican College, a Church of England college, within the University of Sydney. That is the college which we know today as St. Paul's. Now, these examples actually reflect underlying issues about the nature of authority, power, distribution in the state and in the church. How is a voluntary association like a church or any other kind of voluntary association permitted within the state to exercise juridical authority over its members? Does it have any power to do that? And in relation to what kinds of questions? Within the church, the question arises as to how does the church consider itself to be able to discipline the clergy and the bishops in a way which was adequate to the tradition of Anglicanism, but which on the other hand was satisfactory to the then contemporary ideas about justice and social fairness. Those issues remain. Who runs the Anglican Church of Australia realistically is still a question. Of course, the laity are a majority members of the synods, but the day-to-day running of the church is in large measure, if not always universally, in the hands of the clergy and the bishops. And that's mostly where the power is exercised. So the question which arises for the church is not just who is the Anglican Church or what are they, but what institutional shape ought they to have in order to run their own community affairs. The issue came up in the recent Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Who was able to deal with complainants properly? Who had dealt with them properly? Not many people, apparently. And that commission found it very difficult to understand the non-hierarchical structure of what appeared to be a hierarchical church. Those issues create real conflict within the Anglican Church of Australia today. And they need to be addressed in a way which deals with the underlying principles at stake. And those principles need to be teased out and see what the final assumptions within any argument look like in the light of some open and courteous and respectful argument. It's also the case that those issues arise within our nation state. What kind of moral questions does the state need to deal with? What are moral questions in relation to marriage, or freedom of religion, or euthanasia, or abortion? And how does the state deal with those? And how does a voluntary association like a church approach those questions in relation to the kind of state or governance or culture which exists in our society today? How far in Anglicanism have we not forgotten the kind of power which the Church of England had in the Christendom period? Do we think of power in terms which are out of date and out of place? So these are fundamental questions which I hope the book will raise for people who read it. It deals with questions in the 19th century, but they are vitally important underlying issues that still affect us today in both church and state. And I hope you will read the book, buy it, and enjoy it, and be challenged a little by the difficulties which it raises for the way in which we conduct our business these days. Thank you.